Good afternoon, Genesee Valley. Again, I'm Christian Purvis here at the Genesee Sun, multimedia journalist, here today again with Fred Miner for our weekly segment. Lately we've been talking a lot about gun control and violations of the Second Amendment. And kind of, I guess, continuing in a similar line of thought, I had personally been reading a little bit of the Geneseo's publication, the Lamron, and there was an interesting editorial article regarding Obama and his frequent violation of what is known as rule of law, which is something I'm not entirely versed upon, but basically, according to the Lamron, there had been a few assassination of American citizens and other sort of questionable practices that were done under the Obama administration that have been causing rise for some concern amongst some of the editorial staff over at the Lamron and other students at Geneseo. But Fred, if you had any opinions on that, I'd love to hear them.
Sure, okay. Well, if I could, I'd like to back up a little bit because a lot of people don't understand. When we talk about rule of law, I mean, they're really going back to the American Revolution and George Washington. I don't know if they teach this anymore, but actually, as a fact, there were people that went to George Washington at the end of the Revolution, wanted him to become the King of America, and he was horrified with the idea. It took them a while to work it out. We went through the Federalist Papers, Shays' Rebellion, and a bunch of other stuff before they finally got around to writing the Constitution as we have it. But they came up with this idea of a republic as our government, in which the Constitution is the king. And a lot of people don't look at it that way, but that's actually what we have, so that we had a foundation, and it wasn't laws that caused restrictions to people, but they defined what people's rights were, and then everything else was to be built around that. And if you look at the history of, for example, Supreme Court decisions over the years, what they do is they hold up different laws that get passed, or behavior of the government, sometimes, maybe not necessarily just a new legislation, but they look at that in comparison to what are the defined rights of American citizens. And so if something's constitutional, it means that, yes, you can do that and still not violate these defined rights. Okay, so when we break somehow, when we violate those defined rights, that's when we've broken the rule of law. And so it could be, any of the Constitution, or for that matter, other laws that have been passed since. I think specifically what your school paper was referring to, the very first one that I know of, was there was a suspected Al-Qaeda terrorist who was actually an American-born citizen. He was of Islamic Arabic descent, but he was born here in America, which therefore makes him a citizen and entitled to all of the rights and privileges that go with being an American citizen. He was located through Interpol or some one of the security services. He was in Yemen. They were tracking him. They thought that he was an imminent threat to the United States, and so they sent a drone in, and basically, without being at war with Yemen, we violated their sovereign territory, and this drone fired a missile that took out this guy as he sat in a coffee shop talking to another alleged terrorist. And also, I believe he had a young son who was like 12 or 14 years old that was present and was also killed. And a lot of people would look at that and say, well, good, we got rid of a terrorist. But if this guy was an American citizen, he is entitled to all the things we're entitled to. He should have been arrested, known what his charges were, been able to face his accusers, been able to receive legal counsel, and then been tried by a jury of his peers. That's how our system works, and that's what guarantees all the rest of us the same rights.
Right.
So if we make an exception for that guy because we think he had Al-Qaeda, which of course the court is supposed to prove. The burden of proof is on the government to say, okay, we think this was a guy who was an Al-Qaeda operative. Well, okay, then prove it. And I have no problem with the fact that if he was, he would be arrested, tried. If he killed people, take him out and execute him by firing squad. But he should have been able to go through that process under the law. But that's only one of a number of examples. I am very dismayed to see Eric Holder, who should be the top policeman of the country. That's he's the head of the Department of Justice. He is in charge of law enforcement at the highest possible level. And one of the first things that he and President Obama declared was that they weren't going to enforce the Defense of Marriage Act. Okay, now, I don't care what somebody's attitude is towards the Defense of Marriage Act. I don't want to get into that issue, but the fact is it was a law duly passed by Congress, signed by a prior president. It is the law of the land until it is amended or revoked. And if there is public will to do that, then it should go through the legislative process and be either amended or revoked. Or the other option is it could be challenged at the court level, and if it goes all the way to the Supreme Court and they say, yeah, this is an unconstitutional law, then it's null and void. But you can't have the President of the United States, and he's Attorney General, just say, we're not going to enforce this. When you get into selective enforcement of the law, that is another aspect of tyranny. That's what tyrants do. And if they can throw out one aspect of the law, what about other aspects? If they don't like that, then, and we see a president who is really prone to sign a lot of executive orders. When he gets on, and he actually makes public statements and says, well, if Congress won't work with me, I've got a pen. Well, good. My attitude about that is take that pen and sit on it, buddy, because you're supposed to be the chief executive of the United States, not the lawmaker. The executive branch is to execute the law, not make it. Mm-hmm. So there's a real danger there. I do agree with the
conflict of interest to some extent.
Conflict, well, not necessarily conflict of his interest, but a conflict with us.
Of the public interest.
I want to always receive due process. And we've seen other violations. There's things people don't think about much. We're coming up on the anniversary of the Boston Marathon and the bombing that took place. Well, and of course there's a lot of news this year about all the security that's going to be in place and cameras, and they're going to be checking people. No more backpacks, all clear plastic bags, stuff like that. That's all fine. I don't want people to get blown up at public events. But as it turns out, it appears that there were two young brothers, radicalized, that carried this out. And the one that got away for a time was just a teenage kid. Now, I'm not saying it's a lesser thing that he killed people. There's nothing good about what he did. But, they shut down a city over that. Without declaring martial law, they went out and enforced martial law. They told people at risk of being shot to stay in their homes. The police went around, they went house to house and searched. If they wanted to go in a house, they didn't get a warrant. They went in the house and they just checked. They did what they wanted to. And that scares me, frankly. That really does scare me, that we have a country now where the police can just take over and enact a police state. The other one that scares me is the fact that every little podunk town in America seems to be putting together a SWAT team. You ever thought about the militarization of our police forces? And why? I actually happen to know a guy who was a retired officer. He was the head of the SWAT team up in Batavia, New York. Batavia's not a very big town. Very small city. The way they're doing this, the mechanics of it is that they get federal funds for drug interdiction, and that's what it's all supposed to be about. But then you've got these guys sitting around with body armor, fully automatic weapons, armored vehicles,
why would they need
all this
that?
Other stuff. Yeah, why do they need that to enforce the law in small towns and small cities across America? And the fact is that we have about 50 casualties a year of innocent people that are accidentally shot during the raids that these SWAT teams carry out. I know of one particular that it was a child in an apartment in, I'm not sure if it was Cleveland or Detroit, but the police force actually got the wrong floor of an apartment complex. They thought they were busting a drug dealer's apartment. They were on the wrong floor. It was a dad and his 8-year-old daughter was on the couch, and she was shot by the police and killed.
It's brutal.
It really is. So I think I'm glad the school paper's bringing this up. They're right to be concerned, and I think we should all be concerned. Where do we go from there?
I don't know.
It's
all very, it's a very interesting.
It's interesting and disturbing at the same time. If anybody's interested and you want to get really upset, get your blood pressure up, go. There's a website out there called Lou Rockwell, L-E-W, and Rockwell, just like it sounds. And he documents cases of police brutality around the country, and it's pretty frightening, honestly. And now with dash cams and everybody having video cameras, they're able to record a lot of these, and you see the behavior, and you go, wow, this is America? This is something like I would expect in Nazi Germany or maybe Soviet Russia. Mm-hmm. Not here. So be aware, folks. We don't always want to be so somber, but I think it's important that people know what's going on, and that way we can put pressure on our public officials before this gets really out of hand.
And in the instances where you might need to be able to defend yourself against kind of instances of brutality. I feel like, Fred, you might be in a perfect position to inform people about how they might go about learning those kind of techniques.
Yeah, that's a lot bigger program than this, and perhaps we could talk about some of that next week, but that's where I really encourage people to get into some of our classes. We do legalities classes specifically about carrying a handgun, and I really encourage people before they even go out and get a permit to understand what the legal issues are. Understand what the moral and ethical implications are of actually using a firearm, because you're talking about deadly force. People really ought to know those things before they consider going out and doing it. There's too many cowboys that, get that macho idea, well, I've got a gun, I'll just take care of my problems. Well, you better know what you're doing, or not only will you cause yourself a lot of harm, but you'll end up, probably bankrupt by the legal system. So, word to the wise.
All right. Well, Fred, it seems like that's all we really have time for today, but hopefully looking forward to hearing about some of the similar topics next week on our weekly special.
Yeah, I think maybe we'll do that. We'll talk about some of those legal implications. How's that?
Sounds like a good idea. Well,
we'll see what you folks think.
Here at the Genesee Valley, stay hooked.